My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 5 years, I thought I was happily married to my husband, Derek. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Willowbrook, a small town where everyone knows each other. We didn't have kids, but I dreamed of starting a family one day. Derek worked a lot. He was always on the move, handling things at the corporate office, but he made time for me on weekends. At least, that's what I believed. We met through my father, Mr. Raymond Carter, who used to be the CEO of the company Derek worked for. My dad always spoke highly of Derek, called him sharp, dedicated, and trustworthy. So when Derek asked me out, it felt right. He was charming and polite. Within a year, we were married. After we got married, Derek suggested I quit my job and become a full-time homemaker. He said, "You don't need to work. I make enough for both of us. Take this time to enjoy life. Focus on your hobbies." At first, I was unsure. I liked working, but I also wanted to be a good wife. So I agreed. I spent my days keeping our home spotless and cooking Derek's favorite meals. I took up sewing and knitting to pass the time. It became more than a hobby. It became my joy. Every winter, I'd knit him scarves and gloves. My early attempts were clumsy, but I improved. By the third year, Derek smiled and said, "These feel like store-bought. You've gotten really good." His words made me feel proud. I kept making them, hoping he'd be happy each time. One day, I told him, "When we have a child, I'd love to teach them how to knit. Maybe you'll join in too." He chuckled and said, "Sure. I'll give it a try when that time comes." That smile, that warmth, it made me believe our love was real. I supported him in every way. Cooked, cleaned, managed everything at home, so he could focus on work. From the outside, we looked like a perfect couple. I was content. But deep down, there were signs I ignored. A couple of years ago, everything began to shift, but it didn't happen all at once. One chilly evening in November, I was waiting for Derek to come home. I had just finished setting the table and warming his favorite chicken stew. But before I could even sit down, I felt lightheaded. The room tilted, my legs gave out, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The white ceiling lights felt too bright. I blinked a few times and saw Derek sitting beside me, talking to the doctor. His tone was serious. "How bad is it?" he asked. The doctor sighed and explained I had a neurological condition, not immediately life-threatening, but something that would require long-term monitoring and possibly lifelong care. He recommended I stay in the hospital for a while to stabilize my body. I felt frozen. I didn't know how to respond. Derek looked at me and took my hand. "It's going to be okay," he said gently. "You just need to rest. I'll visit when I can. We'll get through this together." Those words were like medicine for my heart. They reminded me why I fell in love with him. He stayed that night until I fell asleep, and when I opened my eyes the next morning, he was still there. During the early months of my hospital stay, Derek came almost every day. He brought me snacks, little books, even my sewing tools to help me pass the time. He joked about how bad he was at sewing, and I laughed while teaching him simple stitches. We'd chat about the smallest things, what he had for lunch, something funny a coworker said, and for a while, it felt like we were closer than ever. But slowly, the visits began to change. At first, he started coming every other day. Then, once a week. Then not at all for weeks. I told myself he must be working overtime. I didn't want to seem clingy, so I stayed quiet. I focused on my sewing, imagining how happy he'd be when I gave him another pair of handmade gloves for winter. The doctor said I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I thought giving Derek those gloves would be the perfect symbol of how far we'd come, through sickness, through time apart, through love. But when he finally showed up after weeks of silence, the man who walked into the room felt like a stranger. I was so happy to see Derek walk into the room that I almost forgot how long it had been since his last visit. I smiled and held out the gloves I'd knitted with so much love. "I made these for you," I said softly. "I thought they'd keep your hands warm this winter." He didn't take them. Instead, he looked at them like they were trash. "Are you seriously still making these?" he said with a disgusted expression. "Emily, these are a nuisance now." I blinked. I didn't understand what he meant. Then, without any warning, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto my bed. It slid across the blanket and stopped near my hand. I unfolded it slowly. Divorce papers. My hands trembled. The scarf I gave him last year, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was also there. It was untouched, exactly how I gave it to him. I heard you'll be discharged soon, Derek said casually. So, I think it's time we end this. I can't keep doing this anymore. I stared at him. I felt like I was frozen. But you told me we'd get through this together, I whispered. He let out a short, cold laugh. Yeah, well, I lied. I've had enough. Ever since we got married, it's been one thing after another. And now you're sick? I didn't sign up to babysit a patient. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had loved this man, trusted him, given him everything. He kept going. Honestly, I only married you because your dad was my boss. It made things easier at work. That's it. I never cared about handmade scarves or some fantasy life. Who even wears this stuff anymore without being embarrassed? That's when I noticed something. Around his neck was a sleek, designer scarf I had never seen before, clearly expensive. That scarf, not mine, was what he valued now. I realized in that moment that he had probably never worn any of my gifts. Not once. Derek wasn't done. After your dad retired, you became useless to me, he said flatly. You getting sick was honestly kind of helpful. I used it to build sympathy at work. It helped my image, got me closer to a promotion. He smirked, proud of himself. Every time I needed time off, I'd just say, my wife's in the hospital. People praise me for being a good guy. So yeah, I made it work for me. There was no regret in his voice. No guilt. Just satisfaction. The man I once thought was gentle, loving, and supportive was gone. In his place stood someone who had used my illness as a career tool and saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, but I didn't let it show in my voice. Well, I said, looking him in the eye, if I helped you get ahead, then you're welcome. And then I handed him back the divorce papers. After Derek walked out of my hospital room with the signed papers in hand, I sat there in silence for a long time. My heart felt numb. He had discarded me so easily, like I was nothing. But deep down, I wasn't shocked. A part of me had sensed the change in him a long time ago. When I was finally discharged weeks later, my parents came to take me home. I moved back into their house while I recovered. They were both supportive, but when I told them what Derek had said, how he used my illness to gain sympathy and only married me for connections, my father, Mr. Raymond Carter, nearly exploded with anger. I trusted him, Dad said through clenched teeth. I recommended him to that company. I brought him into our lives. It doesn't matter now, I told him quietly. What's done is done. Still, before settling into my old room, I wanted to go back to the house Derek and I once shared. I wanted to pack up a few things, clothes, photo albums, some of my sewing materials. So my parents and I drove there together. But something felt wrong. When we arrived, I couldn't unlock the front door. My key didn't work. Confused, I rang the doorbell. A man I'd never seen before opened the door. Yes, he said politely. Hi. I used to live here, I said slowly. Is Derek here? The man looked puzzled. I bought this house months ago. My wife and I moved in about 6 weeks ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. You bought it? He nodded. From a guy named Derek. Said he was relocating and needed to sell fast. Behind him, I saw a child's toys on the floor. A woman's coat hanging near the door. This wasn't my home anymore. When I stepped back in shock, my parents looked horrified. My mother covered her mouth. My father's fists clenched. But I shook my head and said, let's go. It's not their fault. I didn't want to make a scene in front of the new family. They didn't deserve that. So we got in the car and drove away. But once we got home, I called Derek immediately. He answered on the third ring. Emily, what's up? You sold the house? I asked flatly.
Oh.
Yeah, I did, he replied, as if it were no big deal. Look, I needed the money. Consider it compensation. It was in my name anyway, so there's nothing you can do. He said it so casually I felt sick. That house was supposed to be ours, I said. You didn't even tell me. You weren't using it, he said with a chuckle. You were in the hospital. And besides, I had bills to take care of. I ended the call. But I wasn't done. I turned to my father and said, Dad, I need your help. It's time we teach Derek what it means to play dirty. My dad gave me a proud nod. I'll start gathering the documents. We've got a lot to work with. And just like that, the pain I had been carrying began to turn into something else. Strength. The following week, we invited Derek to a formal meeting at my parents' house. He didn't know what was coming. My father, mother, and I sat together across from him at the long dining table. Derek sat alone, relaxed, with a smug look on his face, like he was still in control. I'm the one who gave up everything, he said, stretching back in his chair. All I want is to keep the money from the house sale. That's fair, right? His fake kindness made my skin crawl. But I kept my voice calm. There's something important you need to see first, I said. My father slid a folder across the table. Derek opened it and frowned. What's this? He asked. It's the land deed, my father explained. The house was in your name, yes. But the land beneath it? That still legally belongs to me. Derek's smile faded. You sold the house, I said firmly, but not the land it stands on. That land is still in my family's name. You never had the right to include it in the sale. The new owners are living in a house that legally sits on someone else's property. He blinked fast. Wait, that doesn't matter, right? I sold the building, not the ground. Wrong, I interrupted. You misled them. They think they bought a full property. Once they find out the land isn't part of the deal, they could sue you for fraud. And they'd be right too. Derek's lips parted, but no words came out. He finally understood the mess he was in. We spoke to the new owners, I added. They're very reasonable, but they want answers. If you don't compensate them, or help fix this, they're prepared to go to court. Derek's hands shook slightly as he asked, So, what do you want me to do? I leaned in, looking him straight in the eye. You're going to pay for the land. Full price. So the family can properly own both house and land. If you don't, they'll sue. And if you try to avoid it, we'll help them win. He slumped forward in the chair. I don't have that kind of money. I smiled. Then maybe you shouldn't have sold what wasn't yours. My father spoke next. You know, Derek, even though I'm retired, I still have connections. Word's getting around about what you did. You didn't just lose our trust. You're starting to lose your reputation, too. Derek looked stunned. He knew what that meant. He'd already noticed colleagues treating him differently at work. And now it was spreading. I continued. Also, I'm filing for emotional damages. You used my illness for your gain, lied to me, and left me when I needed you most. I may not win a big payout, but it will be in the public record. And that's enough. Derek didn't argue. He couldn't. He just sat there, pale, quiet, and defeated. For the first time, I felt powerful. The negotiation didn't last long after that. Derek knew he had no way out. Every lie, every selfish decision he had made was now costing him everything. He agreed, reluctantly, to pay for the land, knowing full well the price was almost double what he sold the house for. My father had intentionally held onto that land for years, and it had become prime property in our town. But that wasn't the end. I'll also need to see your updated financial records, I added. If you try to hide assets or avoid paying what you owe, we'll involve the court. And I won't go easy. He gave me a bitter look but nodded. Fine, I continued. And we're not done. You took money from the house that we shared during marriage. Whether the house was in your name or not, we were still legally married at the time. I'm claiming my half of the profits. His face turned red. But you weren't even living there. That doesn't matter, I said. You sold it behind my back. You don't get to decide who's entitled to what. My father leaned in and added, You're lucky we're only asking for money. The family that bought the house is ready to go public. If they do, your name won't just be ruined at work, it'll be on local news. Derek buried his face in his hands. Then, the final blow came. "I know about the woman you've been seeing," I said, dropping a small printed photo on the table. One that showed him in the hospital parking lot, hugging a woman in a red coat. She was the same woman the nurse had described during my stay. He looked at the photo, then up at me, his mouth open, but no excuse came out. "Save it," I said. "I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in closure." The silence in the room was thick, but I didn't feel sad. I felt relief. He had used my name, my illness, my father's respect, and our marriage like tools. And now he was watching it all slip away. By the end of the meeting, Derek agreed to pay for the land and split the house sale profit. He signed documents to settle our financial division in writing. He accepted the emotional damages claim, knowing it would stain his reputation permanently. And most importantly, the company found out. Within days, I received word from a former colleague of my father's. Derek's promotion was canceled, and he was put on extended leave. A week later, he resigned. Now, months later, I live peacefully at my parents' home. I started a small sewing class for local women and children. Every week, our dining room turns into a cozy workshop full of laughter, patterns, and the quiet hum of learning. No, I didn't get the child I once dreamed of having with Derek. But I share my love of sewing with dozens of kids who call me Miss Emily. I watch their small fingers fumble with thread and needles, just like I once did. And I smile, because I'm finally building something real. Not based on lies. Not on someone else's approval. But on self-worth, community, and peace. And as for Derek? He vanished from Willowbrook, jobless, disgraced, and alone. He used me to climb the ladder. But in the end, he fell hard. And I sewed a new life from the scraps he left behind.